Hello and welcome to Varrostories. In this video I will tell you about the Dungeons & Dragon-inspired story, The Blood Moon Ritual. The wind howled through the dense forests of Eloria, twisting around the towering trees and carrying with it the scent of ash and foreboding. The stars above, bright and unyielding, were swallowed whole by the rising crimson glow of the blood moon, casting a reddish hue across the land. The blood moon, a rare celestial event that marked the alignment of the planets and the rising of an ancient evil, a time when the veil between worlds grew thin. Alistair Dawnshade, a seasoned ranger, stood at the edge of the darkwood forest, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the sky. Beside him was Selene Nightwhisper, a rogue with a sharp wit and quicker blade. She leaned against a tree, arms crossed, watching the moon's eerie rise. Their companions, Kale Stormfury and Lady Lyra Silverbrook, stood a few paces away, engaged in quiet conversation. Alistair had been tracking the cult for months, ever since whispers had reached him of a group of fanatics preparing for the blood moon. Now, the pieces were falling into place. "Do you feel it?" Kale's voice broke through the stillness. His large frame, wrapped in silvered armor, was tense as he gazed at the horizon. "The air, it's thick with magic. I've never felt anything like it before." "I've felt it," Alistair replied, his voice low. "The blood moon isn't just a celestial event. It's a signal. The cult plans to summon an ancient god, one older than the stars themselves. They've waited a century for this moment." Selene's lips curled into a smirk. "Let's hope they're not expecting us to just roll over. I'd rather die fighting than let some half-mad cultists summon their god." "We will stop them," Lyra said, her voice steady. Lyra, a powerful sorceress, had once been part of the royal court, but she had left her noble life behind to pursue the study of arcane magic. She had seen the signs of the coming ritual long before Alistair had. Kale clutched the hilt of his greatsword, a weapon passed down through generations. "We should be ready. If they succeed, this world will burn." Alistair nodded. "We're close. The ritual site should be just beyond that ridge. We need to move quickly, before they begin the summoning." The adventurers moved with purpose through the darkened forest, their footsteps silent against the soft earth. The oppressive atmosphere of the blood moon grew heavier with every step. The trees around them seemed to bend unnaturally, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. As they reached the ridge, the group crouched low, peering down into the valley below. There, in the heart of the forest, stood an ancient stone circle, its edges inscribed with glowing runes. Cultists, draped in dark crimson robes, moved about the stone circle, preparing for the ritual. At the center of the stone stood a towering altar, and atop it, a pulsating crystal that gleamed with the same blood-red hue as the moon above. "That's it," Alistair whispered. "The ritual is already in motion. We have no time to waste." The air was thick with tension as the adventurers crept closer to the ritual site. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and rocks, but they moved swiftly, each step calculated to avoid detection. The cultists, oblivious to their presence, were focused entirely on the ritual, chanting in an ancient, forgotten tongue. Lyra's hands glowed with arcane energy as she whispered incantations of her own, casting a spell to shield them from magical detection. The wind began to shift, carrying the faintest traces of dark magic, as if the very land was reacting to the cult's efforts. As they reached the edge of the stone circle, Alistair motioned for them to stop. He signaled toward the leader of the cult, a tall figure clad in black armor, a dark helmet obscuring his face. The leader stood at the altar, holding a staff crowned with a large, blood-red gemstone. The cultists gathered around him, their chants growing louder. "They're preparing to open the portal," Kale muttered, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. "We need to stop them now, before it's too late." Lyra glanced at the crystal. "That artifact is the key. It's what binds the ritual together. Destroy it, and the summoning will fail." Alistair nodded. "Selene, can you get close enough to disable their leader? The rest of us will focus on the cultists." Selene grinned, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "I'll take care of it." Just try not to get in my way." With that, she slipped into the shadows, her movements as fluid as water. The rest of the group readied themselves for the fight ahead. The cult leader raised his staff high, and the ground trembled as a crackling energy began to spiral around the stone circle. The blood-red crystal pulsed with a dark light, growing brighter with every moment. "I'm ready," Lyra said, her voice steady. She lifted her hands, drawing upon the power of the arcane. Alistair, Kale, and Lyra moved into position, each preparing to strike. As they did, a screech filled the air. A cry from beyond the veil. The cult leader turned, his eyes blazing with madness. "You dare interfere," he bellowed, his voice like the roar of a storm. "The Ancient One will rise, and all will kneel before its power." Without hesitation, the adventurers charged. The clash of steel echoed through the forest as the adventurers engaged the cultists. Kale swung his greatsword in a sweeping arc, cutting down 2 cultists in one stroke. The cultists were fierce, their desperation fueling their attacks, but they were no match for the skilled adventurers. Alistair moved like a shadow, his twin daggers flashing as he struck down enemies with precision. Each movement was fluid, calculated, and deadly. The rangers' arrows flew from the trees above, striking cultists in the heart before they even had a chance to react. Meanwhile, Selene was weaving through the cultists, her blade cutting down anyone who got in her way. She was a blur of motion, quick and deadly. She closed in on the cult leader, who had begun to chant louder, his hands raised to the sky. Dark energy crackled around him. "Not so fast," Selene muttered to herself as she closed the gap between herself and the leader. With a swift lunge, she dove at the cult leader, her blade aimed for his heart. But the leader was ready. He twisted his staff, and a wave of dark energy blasted toward her. The rogue barely had time to dodge, rolling to the side to avoid the brunt of the blast. The leader chuckled darkly. "You cannot stop the inevitable, little thief. The god will rise, and you will all perish." "Not today," Selene spat, charging forward once more. Her blade met the staff with a sharp crack, and sparks flew as the 2 forces clashed. She was faster than the cult leader anticipated, ducking under his staff to strike at his knees. He roared in pain, but he quickly recovered, raising his staff to release another blast of energy. Above the chaos, Lyra's voice rang out, her hands raised as she summoned a spell of her own. "Arcane Disruptor!" A wave of magical energy surged from her hands, striking the crystal atop the altar. It shuddered, its pulsing light flickering. The cult leader turned, his eyes wide with fury. "No," he shouted. "You fools have no idea what you're doing." But it was too late. The crystal cracked, and with it, the ritual began to unravel. The ground trembled violently as the blood moon reached its zenith. The cultists screamed in horror and confusion, realizing that their ritual had been thwarted. The sky above the altar shimmered with a strange energy, and for a moment, it seemed as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. Alistair, his eyes wide with disbelief, shouted over the chaos. "It's not over yet." The god, before he could finish, a towering shadow rose from the ground, the shape of something monstrous and eldritch. It was a being of pure darkness, its form ever shifting, like a vast, incomprehensible nightmare. Its eyes, glowing with malice, fixed on the adventurers. The cult leader, despite the crumbling ritual, grinned. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. The god is here." The adventurers stood their ground, fear creeping into their hearts. The god, though not fully manifest, was already a terror in itself. It reached out with tendrils of darkness, grasping at the air as it sought to breach the mortal plane. Kale raised his sword high. "We finish this. Now!" With a roar, the adventurers launched their final assault. Lyra unleashed all her arcane power in a single, devastating blast. The magic collided with the dark figure, sending shockwaves through the valley. Selene, drawing on every ounce of her strength, dove toward the altar once more, her blade striking at the remnants of the crystal. And Alistair, ever the protector, moved to shield his friends from the onslaught of shadow. In a final, desperate moment, the crystal shattered completely, and the creature screamed as it was pulled back into the void. The darkness ebbed away, and the sky returned to its natural state. The blood moon began to wane, its crimson glow fading into the blackness of night. The forest fell silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. The adventurers stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies weary and bruised, but their spirits unbroken. The cultists were defeated, their bodies scattered across the valley. Alistair exhaled, his breath heavy. "We did it. We stopped the ritual." Cale nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But at what cost?" Lyra, her face grim, walked toward the shattered altar. "The world is safe, for now. But the god is not truly gone. It is only sealed away." Selene sighed, leaning against a tree. "We can rest, but the next century will come before we know it. And when it does, we'll be ready." The adventurers looked to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking through the trees. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The blood moon would rise again. And they would be waiting. Thank you for making it to the end. Please feel free to use this story as inspiration for your games.